Okay, so try it now. Try the sound now. Okay, that's good. And then it'd be a bit weird because I have the mic, but it's getting me through the computer, so it's not going. So there might be a bit of a weird echo. And it'll probably pick up the pool table pretty bad, but that's fine because no one will be playing pool while we're doing this, hopefully. The clicker doesn't seem to work. Okay. And you could see me and the slide, could you? Oh, that's good, isn't it?
Focus off.
Oh, okay. Okay, brilliant. Okay, that's great. Hello, it's 6 o'clock. We'll be starting in about 5 minutes. Okay. There's nothing started yet, Colin, if you're waiting to hear the stream. Okay. Okay, we're just going to start in one more minute. So bear with us. Okay. Okay, I think we get going now, if that's okay. Do you folks want to come to the front? Okay. Hopefully people on the stream can hear us. People are here in the office and we can get going. Right. So yeah, welcome to LeedsJS. It's a bit of a show, a small little outing today, but actually when I first came to LeedsJS, it was like 4 or 5 people. So we're still doing better than that. So it's good. It's going good. So tonight we've got myself and Crispin doing talk. And then also we have a guest. What was your name again? Leah. Leah's going to be talking about the hack competition that she was involved in. So very warm welcome. And we'd just dive in, I think. It's an inclusive place. We respect, treat other people as we'd like to be treated. And we just want to make this a happy place and that people can enjoy. For those that aren't here, we've got loads of pizzas coming. And for those that are here, we've got loads of pizzas coming. So I think we've got like 10 large pizzas between us. So I think, yeah, we might be well fed. We've arranged for vegetarian, vegan, gluten-free, etc. So hopefully there is something that you can eat. And without further ado, we get into our first talk. So the format of this will be quite similar to before. Lightning talk. One thing that we do think that we might start trying to do is kind of start talking about some of the JavaScript stuff that's going on, what's happening in the community, make a little bit of a discussion about that. Is there anything that you want to share? Could it be about vulnerabilities in node packages that have been discovered recently and what we've done to mitigate that? Is there anything else that's cool that you wanted to talk about? And I think we might start experimenting with a few of those ideas over the next few sessions. But yeah, let's hand over to Crispin. Okay.
Thank you very much.
This should work.
Great, thanks. Yes. Right, hello everyone. Grant, hello, I'm Crispin. There's a picture of me before I did 18 months in lockdown penitentiary in Ilkley with 3 little kids. Before I start my talk this evening, I want to tell you a story about, I guess, why I think that presenting is a good thing and why and like sort of like my journey into public speaking, if you like. So years ago, when I started my development career, I was working for Ofcom at a point when Ofcom came into being, and I was doing I was working on some stuff with them, and I was doing like little presentations, like presentations to the team about the things that we were working on, what we were doing at the time. We were building like a new intranet for them, and then so one day it was like, oh, can you come and do this presentation for this other team? Yeah, I can do that. And I went to do this presentation, did a little bit of prep. I didn't want to use PowerPoint because I thought it would be a better thing to do a video. So I did like this video of slides and stuff going on behind me as I was going to do this talk. Now, when I got to this talk, I thought I was going to present to like 5 or 6 people in a little boardroom. And what happened was I was presenting to like 200 people on a big stage. And they were all super technical people. They were all the engineers from the old agencies, all the people that knew everything about radio spectrum and about how computers are connected. And I was going to go and do this talk about what we were going to do with the new intranet and with RSS feeds, and did a big and basically it was an absolute proper disaster. I died on my ass. It was awful. I was sweating. I was red. I realized like straight away that I was just talking to 200 grandmas about sucking eggs, and it was terrible. Now what I took away from that, as in like every fail makes you a little bit stronger, what I took away from that was the importance of learning how to do that properly. So I did manage, it was a while before I sorted it out, but I went and did a course at RADA with loads of lovies about presentation skills, and it was brilliant, and I learned loads. And all of there was actor stuff that I had to do, like doing vocal warm-ups and stuff that this talk is not about. But there was also some really, really good points that I used immediately and have continued to use. And this is kind of like super distilled into the talk that I'm going to do now. It's going to be a little bit longer than, like, usually lightning talk is like 5 or 10 minutes, right? This might turn out a little bit longer because as I do the lightning talk, I'm going to talk about why I'm doing the bits of the lightning talk that I'm doing. That makes sense. I hope it does make sense. I maybe should have prepared a little bit more. Right. So why would you start doing it? Why would you do a lightning talk? You know, like You may have you may get experience at work of talking about your stuff. Why would you come to an event like this, spend your time and prepare a talk and deliver it? Well, there's a lot of other benefits to being able to do that and being comfortable doing that. It's not just a thing of okay, like I'm going to get good at public speaking because I want a career in public speaking, after dinner speaking or something like that. The process that you go through in order to collect your thoughts and make them make sense and provide a narrative to people and talk about what you are doing coherently and quickly is an amazing skill. And you use it constantly, daily, through all sorts of jobs, but particularly around development. You want to be able to snapshot, prepare some stuff and talk about it real quick. Another thing, like for getting involved with groups like this, where you've got a really safe space, a few people to practice, and everybody's rooting for you, and it doesn't matter if you stumble, and it doesn't matter if you forget stuff, and it doesn't matter if you have to look at your notes. It's a really good place to start that process. And everybody in the group as well benefits, because even if you think that you're right at the beginning of your career and you don't know nothing and you don't have things to share, you absolutely do. And the way communities like this work is when everybody shares. It's not just, it's not like that the old people tell the young people what to do. We share stuff and we learn from each other. That knowledge share is a really, really strong part of most successful communities. So what I've done is I've distilled all the things that I was thinking about. I've got versions of this that run on for like a couple of days. This is a lightning talk, so I have to like wrap it up quick. So what I've done is I've got a few tips centered around the main points, one by one. Here we go. Start strong. So for a lightning talk in particular, you don't have time to build up to the thing that you're going to tell people about. You tell them about the thing that you're going to do straight off the bat. I'm going to tell you why this is important. I'm going to tell you about this thing, and then you can tell them about the thing. So you need to like do a big headline for a lightning talk. So like what I did just there was like, this is why. I told you a story that was kind of like almost the beginning, but I told you why it was important, and that was to get the main stuff out there. And it gives people as well the reason to keep listening to the rest of the presentation. Tell a story. This is the next part, is you want to construct some sort of narrative. And this is for like every presentation, not just lightning talks, but everything works better if you've got a story to tell. So I told a story at the beginning, and I can keep referring back to that story throughout the presentation, because it's got points about the presentation and points about the things that I'm talking about. People tend to listen more if you're telling a thing and then this, and then this, and then this. It makes more sense to people. So try to think about what is a common one for presentations, especially short ones, is this is the thing I want to talk about. This is the situation that we're in. This is the change I want to affect. This is what we need to do, or something like that. Or this is the current situation. This is the change. You can, as long as you paste something out like that, it's a real quick way of just like, whoop. And it also keeps, it keeps you to time as well, because I'm going to do 1 minute of that one, 1 minute of that one, 1 minute of that one, done. Pace yourself. People don't mind pauses. They actually quite enjoy them. There's a temptation when you're doing the lightning talk, is just like, I'm going to talk like 100 miles an hour and get all the things out of my mouth that are in my head and coming out of my mouth, all about this thing, because I've only got 5 minutes, I'm going to tell you all about it. But people actually are going to listen more if you say less, and you probably don't need to say all of the things that you think you need to. Thinking about commas, I always like to think about commas as big. I like big commas. Sometimes my commas are so big, in just like in my normal life, and my wife would just start a different conversation because the comma that I've done in the conversation that we're having is too big. Simple slides is also like I think this is like most important, especially for lightning talks, but not having loads of stuff on your slides. For me, I'm using this thing, I can't remember what it's called, but it's called the Tekashiti method or something like that. And I'll just embarrass myself by pronouncing a word that I can't remember wrong in front of loads of people. But the method is like you have all you've got on your slides is 1 or 2 words and just big. You don't put anything else on there, and that keeps you focused. It keeps the audience on listening to the story because they're not looking at like some diagrams or some extra stuff. And like this particular method is not. I'm not saying that is the best one to use, but it's a method to get you focused on what you want to talk about. Often when I'm doing presentations, I don't often do slides like this. To be honest, I spend ages just like messing about with slides and like drawing pictures and like doing all sorts of stuff. And like I really enjoy that part of the process of creating a presentation. But what I will start out with is just words on a slide of like, that's the thing I'm going to talk about. And I might arrange them into a different narrative or whatever, but it starts me along the process. And for this, I kept them. Practice is probably another of the most important things. You know, you want to, you don't have to be word perfect in a script. You know, it's not the school play. But the more times you talk about a thing, practice to yourself, look in the mirror or whatever, like, you know, watching yourself do it in the mirror, it's real awkward at first. But once you've done it a bit, it gives you confidence because you realize that you don't look weird. You know, after you've watched yourself a few times, it gives me comfort anyway to do that stuff. And the more times that you roll something over and practice it, the better you get at the delivery, and the easier things come to you. Seek feedback is my other one. Like if you're doing a presentation, you can do that presentation, especially if it's a lightning talk, right? Your mate's got 5 minutes to listen to you talk for 5 minutes about a thing and tell you what they think. And it's good to get people who are going to be honest about it. If they said, "Oh, I didn't really understand what was going on in the middle," or "I wondered why you went off on that tangent," or you know, it can help you make a better presentation real quick. And know your audience. So going back to my story at the beginning, I didn't research the audience. I didn't know who these people were. I had made massive assumptions about who they were based on what I'd done previously. So that was my ultimate downfall in that, because I think like I probably could have winged it if I hadn't gone up and stood up on the stage in front of loads of people who I felt, you know, the imposter syndrome was like out the window, man. Like on that day, like because it was real. Like I was like I shouldn't have been telling those people those things. And knowing your audience means that you know that you're pitching what you're talking about correctly. And summing up, when you do a presentation, what you want to do is you want to like you start strong. You tell everyone what you're going to talk about. You talk about the thing, and then you tell them what you just talked about. This is a thing that that we use loads in training. Of like we constantly go through that cycle of we're going to do this thing. We do the thing. We just did that thing, and we go round and round. And like and it makes sense to us as people. We want to have that pattern is good for us in terms of receiving information, recalling it later. So planning your summing up is really, really important too. So if you think like this is the narrative, whatever, if you could start with what's my last 3 points? What are the 3 takeaways that I want people to, you know, what do I want people to leave with? So for this, for example, is I want people to feel confident that they could do a lightning talk. They could, you know, they could do exactly what I'm doing now, and it wouldn't be a scary thing to do. It would be beneficial, and it would be worthwhile not just to them, but to the other people as well. They're beneficial to the community. So that is my summing up, and the end of my lightning talk. Thank you very much. Happy for any questions. If anyone's got any burning questions. So what went on with the drones? They just knew what I was talking about, and honestly, I didn't even get my presentation out. Like I proper choked on the stage. Like I did, it was almost at the point where like my mum had to come and pick me up. Like I was gone. I was just stood there, didn't know what to do. It was honestly awful experience.
Do we only rehearse in the mirror?
Yeah, to be honest, not so much anymore. But like definitely when I was doing the they made us do it at RADA. They had a room. They made us go to like the dance studio. It's got like the ballet bar, and we had to go and like do presentations to ourselves in the mirror for like half an hour, just to like, I guess like to break the back of it. You know how people used to be scared of like being on video, and now that's our whole entire lives. But like we just did it until it didn't matter anymore, and it does. Like it did work. Like I will do like when I'm like sometimes I'm doing presentations that I'm videoing, right? And I watch them back, and I'm watching myself in the mirror the whole time doing that. So that's kind of, I guess, where that's evolved to. Right, cool. So our segue straight away then. Yes. So Leah, do you want to come up? So this is tidy, isn't it? This is Leah's first talk. And this is, this is what we want to happen at LeedsJS from now on. We want people whose first talk is coming up to do it here.
Let's see if I can actually get it out.
While this is being sorted, should I give a bit of an introduction of myself? So hi everyone, I'm Leah. I've been a developer at a company called Pan Intelligence for about 10 months now, and I've been coding for probably just over a year. So I'm still quite new to the industry, but I recently took part in my first hackathon, and that's what I'm here to talk to you guys about today. Is this what you use? Yeah. It starts on a different slide.
Oh, sorry.
Oops. So how many of you have participated in a hackathon before? Oh, quite a lot of you. So what is this talk about? As I mentioned, I recently took part in my first hackathon, and that was done with 2 of my colleagues from work. So I'm here to talk to you about the idea that we came up with for the hackathon, the tech that we use to bring our idea to life, and then just go through our experiences. So just talk about what you can expect when you're doing a hackathon, and then also some advice that, so if you haven't done a hackathon before, it will just give you a bit of an idea of what it could be like. And to those of you who have done a hackathon before, it's always good to share ideas and experiences anyway, and it offers a chance for me to get some feedback on our idea as well. So if any of you guys have some suggestions for our idea, I'm always welcome to hear them. So I'm going to dive straight into our idea. And just to give you a bit of a background on the hackathon, it was an LGBTQ+ hack run during Leeds Digital Festival. So it's hosted by the Coders Guild, and they worked with various charities across Leeds. And the idea was basically to come up with an idea that would help make Leeds a more inclusive place for the community. Yeah, but as Crispin said, it didn't have to be a technical submission. It could have been a song that you submitted, or even a cake. But sadly, I didn't get to try any cake at the event evening. But with my colleagues, we decided to come up with a technical submission. So we had a bit of a brainstorm to come up with our idea. And there's a few things that we knew we wanted to do. First of all, we knew we wanted to create some kind of website that could be a central location for information. And we knew that we wanted to spread positive information. So we wanted people to come onto our website and hopefully be inspired or encouraged or really feel like they're part of the community. And then we also wanted to have short bursts of information. So kind of inspired by social media apps, we wanted people to come on, be able to just scroll through a couple of sentences maybe, and hopefully take something away from it, because people's attention spans aren't great these days. They don't want to be plodding through loads of information. So this led to our initial idea of a story a day. So this was just the very first idea that we had. the idea was that you could go onto the website and each day there'd be a new story from someone within the community. So this story could have been a coming out story, for example, or just any other kind of positive experiences that could help someone else out. And there's also a comment section you can see at the bottom. So then people could engage with the author, engage with the content, and then engage with other people visiting the website. But we decided to expand this idea a bit further. So we added an event section. And this is really what made it a website specific to Leeds. So we have different events in Leeds that are LGBTQ+ inclusive. So the example here, if you can see, is a book club, but there are things like club nights called Dragon Base, which I really like, and then dog walks as well, things like that. And then we also added a podcast section and a book section. And the idea here was to just offer further suggestions for content, but also it could be a good opportunity to showcase talent in Leeds. So if there are any people from the community who are maybe writing a book or coming up with a podcast or even writing a song, it would be a really good place to showcase that talent as well. The idea isn't really completely finished. There are so many more things that we wanted to add. We would have really liked to add a submission form so people could post their own content and it would be moderated and then put on the website. And then we also thought it would be really good to have user profiles and then potentially even a way to message people going on the website as well. But just because we didn't really have enough time, we couldn't add those features. So I'm going to dive a little bit into the tech that we used. We used React, which is a really great JavaScript framework. And the reason why we picked React was mainly just because it was a really quick and easy tool to bring our idea to life. So I put together a few reasons why React was really great for creating our proof of concept. So first of all, it's really easy to get started if you know the basics of JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. And with just a couple of React commands, you can get a project set up within seconds, and you can really easily see the changes you're making as it updates live. Number two, there are so many libraries that make it really easy to use and add cool features as well. So we used React Router, for example, to switch between the different sections on our website, and then some CSS tools like style components to make the CSS a bit easier for us to do. And then lastly, my favorite point, it's really reusable. So the code for each of the sections is exactly the same. We're just plugging different data into it. So it became really easy to scale our idea. So while we started off with just a story a day, we could really easily expand that to have the different sections that we did have. And then we could just as easily add 5 or 10 more. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about what you can expect when you're doing a hackathon. And so these are just some of the processes that we went through when we were coming up with our idea. So I've talked a bit about our brainstorm. First of all, as well, you need to think about how you're going to split the work. So for us, it was quite easy. There were 3 of us, so we divided it. So one person was working on the design, I was doing the functionality, and then my colleague Miles at the back was focusing on deployment. So he set it up on a domain, so you could actually go to the website rather than just running it locally. Number 2, deciding the tech that you're going to use. And this really depends on the hackathon itself and what you want to get out of the hack. So we were talking about maybe learning a new language for it so we could develop our skills further. But in the end, we decided to just focus on getting the idea out there as soon as possible. So we went with the trusty React. And then number 3, working with time constraints. And this is a good chance to think about MVP. So that's a minimum viable product. So for us, thinking about an MVP was kind of like, what was the minimum we had to do to get our idea across? So then we could talk about how we can expand it as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And this links in with the tips that I have about doing a hackathon. Number 1, do not worry about submitting an incomplete idea. We had loads of grand ideas of setting up a database and using APIs and getting some really cool data into our website, but we just didn't really have the time for it. It was a 2-week hackathon, but we all have 9-to-5 jobs. And then Miles went to the Lake District halfway through as well. So we didn't really have time to do all that. And we nearly didn't submit anything, but we did. And then we ended up winning. So it just goes to show that even if your idea isn't complete, the fact that you put the time into it, shown dedication to your idea, and demonstrated that you could put something together had you had more time, I think that's the most important thing. And then number 2, proof of concepts are just as important as the end product. Because if you get your idea out there, then there's a chance to watch as the idea evolves. You can get feedback from other people and see if there's anyone else out there that can help you with your idea, which again leads on to my last point. Getting your ideas out there is the most important thing. And then I've got a bit of a tagline. What happens in a hackathon, it doesn't just have to stay in a hackathon, because as soon as you get your ideas out there, you can get so much feedback from other people. And Crispin actually offered the great suggestion of making an open source project. So it doesn't just have to be specific to Leeds. People in Manchester could get the code from GitHub. and then plug in their own data. And then eventually it could be a website for all locations across the UK. So just to sum up, I've shown you our idea of the LGBTQ daily content generator as a proof of concept, definitely not in its final version. I've talked about how React was really, really great to get our idea out there quite quickly. And then the most important thing, get involved and get your ideas out there, because you never know who can help you out. Even if you don't have the technical skills, someone else could definitely help you as long as you've got the idea. And that's it. Thank you so much for listening. Any questions?
Is the site live?
Well, it is. You'll have to ask Miles about whether it's still working. Oh no, he can get it back. Oh, thank you so much.
We do have a GitHub project.
Well done, and congratulations.
Thank
on winning
you.
a hackathon. It's
Thanks
always
so
a good
much.
feeling to win, isn't it?
Yes, definitely.
Cool, brilliant. I liked your point, some of your points there. It's interesting that you said you chose React because it's really easy, and that's the first kind of time I've heard people have that kind of sentiment towards React. Yeah, so. And interestingly, as another side point, and the other point that you made was that what comes out of our hackathon can sometimes live as real ideas. When I was at Sky.com, and a lot of Sky.com is now based off of a code base that they came up with in a hackathon, and that was written in React as well. Interestingly, so yeah, thanks for that. Cool. So we will move on to our main talk. If anyone wants to grab a drink, you can. You've got to run very quickly. Okay, great. So yeah, so I'm now going to talk about some JavaScript tooling that we all know and love. We probably interact with, perhaps on a daily basis. But let's get the first question out of the way, because this really bothered Joe. It really bothered him. I always thought Joe was quite a reasonable chap.
I am most of it.
But on this particular subject, he was quite adamant that it shouldn't be called Babel. He was quite adamant that it shouldn't be called Babel. And so now I'm inclined just to call it Babel for the rest of the talk to wind up Joe. No, you can pronounce it Babel or Babel. In all seriousness, I will refer to it as Babel. The creator of it said, I don't care, you could call it what you want. That chap was Australian and probably doesn't understand the English language. But, sorry if any of you are Australian. No, all joking aside, yeah, let's just call it Babel from now on. It doesn't really matter. But I'm kind of a bit lazy, and I don't know if you're lazy as developers, that you just get stuff working, right? If it works, great. Let's move on to the next problem. Let's go on to the next step. And I don't know if you've messed about with Babel at all. Getting things set up, getting imports working properly. This has got a lot easier now than what it was when I was doing a lot of JavaScript, probably 6 or 7 years ago, when Babel was becoming a thing, when transpilers were now part of our regular workflow. But you all do understand why Babel is a thing, right? Does everyone understand that? And feel free throughout the talk, if you don't understand something and you want something explained, myself or other people will be more than happy to share. But basically, JavaScript is so constantly changing, and it's run in so many different environments that the environments that it's running on, sure, it understands old ES5 JavaScript, but will it understand ES6? Will it understand ES7, which now are quite old and noddy? But even if I mention module imports, actually, these things haven't been resolved really nicely in JavaScript these last few years that we've been using Babel, which is surprise, right? Because, and I'll go into why it still is definitely not solved. But let's just get going. What do we need to do to get Babel at its core working in its most simplest form? And what is it actually doing? What is Babel doing here? So in your package.json, put in a few dev dependencies here, the CLI and core, and smash out some code as simple as I could think of. Let's have a map of 1, 2, and 3, iterate it, and add n+1. So that should come out with 2, 3, 4, right? As an array on the other end. Simple stuff. Okay, happy days. So we run our Babel command, which could also be npx Babel source out directory lib. Of course, this file is living in source somewhere. And output it, and what do we get? Oh, wasn't meant to do that, right? It was meant to put it into some more readable JavaScript for old browsers and stuff, right? I thought this just pumped out readable, everyone can read stuff at the end, but it doesn't seem like it can on its own. So what are we missing? We all know the answer, right? We're missing some plugins. Babel on its own doesn't do a lot. It just, and I'll talk about what it's doing a bit later, but it's basically taking something and putting it out. But it needs a mechanism to run over that thing to change it to something else. And if it doesn't have that, it just push out what it's got. So what plugin do you think that we would need here? Let's look at the plugin transform arrow functions. That looks like it will probably do the trick, right? So we want to transform arrow functions. Perfect. So we've got our input, and quite thankfully, yes, it does the job. Okay, plugins sorted. We now know what plugins do, providing you select the right plugin. But interestingly, I also put an option in to say that I wanted to include source maps. So source maps gave us this lovely string of text, which I know you can all decrypt in your head. So I spent 10 minutes writing a script to decrypt it, how to decrypt source maps. And you will be amazed at what came out the other side when I decrypted this source map. It was kind of exactly the same thing. Oh, well. Worthwhile knowing that that feature exists. So I kind of spent this last 2 or 3 weeks just messing about with stuff in Babel to see, how does it do this? How does it do that? How does it work with, you know, arrow functions? And then we kind of dive into that deeper. And, you know, how does it deal with scope handling? Okay, it's a fairly simple plugin. All it's doing is making an arrow function a normal function. But as you all know, that the difference between arrow functions and normal functions is how it handles scope. So here, if you want to log out what this prototype is, it shouldn't be the scope of the arrow function. In this case, it should be the global scope. So what it has actually put out in this case is that it's dealt with the scope by assigning a temporary this. These become more and more unreadable as they go on, which is unfortunate, but you understand the reason why. So this and this prototype is on that global scope, not on the scope of the actual function itself. So what about if you give it a more complicated case? So in this case, you haven't just got a global scope and a function-based scope, you've got some nested functions. So the first arrow function is in the scope of no arrow, and the second arrow function scope is in the scope of the global scope. And, you know, it comes up with something like this. Now it says, okay, this prototype is the global scope. So we deal with that because that's inside no arrow. Then next, you then have an arrow function that uses, sorry, that isn't a global scope. That's the scope of no arrow. So it creates a scoped this there, and then it creates another one on the global scope. So it's kind of juggling these scopes around why it does it. So each individual Babel plugin needs to be thinking about the concerns that it's dealing with. And as your code gets more complex, then the way that the plugin needs to deal with that, it needs to juggle that around and understand the context within which it's operating. And we'll look at one or two more plugins later that are kind of interesting. Any questions? You okay? Hopefully everyone is keeping up. Sorry, it's quite a diverse group, so I know there's going to be hopefully something for everyone, and maybe not everyone will get lost. Okay, so presets. Anyone know what presets are? Come on, someone put your hand up. I thought like everyone knew. I was like totally imposter syndrome here. It's like I write preset this and that in my code all the time, and I don't know what they are. Go.
Yes, so it's just like a whole load of rules.
Yeah, you're getting. Yeah, so they are recommended rules, but Babel presets can act as a shareable set of Babel plugins and or configuration options. So the ones that you're putting in all the time, which is probably this guy or this lady, then this is a bunch of it's a smart preset that allows you to use the latest JavaScript without needing to micromanage which syntax, transforms, and optionally browser polyfills are needed by your target environments. This both makes your life easier and JavaScript bundles are smaller. And it's, like you said, a big list of plugins that are recommended for this particular use case. So actually, there's a ton more there. So it's got quite a few in there. But this plugin, this preset is actually really, really powerful and useful. And I strongly encourage using it as your main staple and way of transpiling JavaScript. Okay, so let's see it in action. So now we will have an index.js, and it will read a map from my map. It will output the contents of 1, 2, 3. And then in my map, which is the file it's reading, it will export the default function, an arrow function of n is n plus 1. So again, doing exactly the same thing, just splitting it out into 2 files. Should really be really simple, right? This is simple stuff. Yeah, it becomes a little bit more complicated. So my map, which is 1 line of JavaScript, suddenly becomes like, I think that's like 12 lines of JavaScript right there. It's trying to deal with how JavaScript environments very inconsistently read modules and how it can read those modules in. And Babel has its own way of doing it, which is by adding this ES module object property on the object to see, is this a Babel object or not? And I'm not going to get into the syntax that it's going, because otherwise you really will be bored. And I'd rather not bore you out before the pizzas arrive. And again, we can see from here, there's a bunch of code that also makes index.js really complex in order to deal with its module loading system. So there's all sorts of complexities around the JavaScript ecosystem that mean that we still need this crucial tool in order to be able to read modules and deal with newer JavaScript, even though a lot of browsers now know like the simple stuff. All the modern browsers know how to read arrow functions, but it still struggles with some of those core concepts that are still written in very different ways. So how does a plugin work? Okay, how's it doing this stuff? How's it creating this different content? ASTs, anyone? Anyone know what an AST is? Thank you. Great. And what is an abstract syntax tree? It's like this. This is a JavaScript abstract syntax tree for bringing in my map into index. So if you read through this, you can actually kind of work it out. So any programming language that's interpreting code, it always pulls it into something like an AST. Usually it's an AST. In most programming languages, it absolutely is. And as we read through it, yeah, we can pretty much make it out. Yeah, I don't quite know what generator it's referring to. I don't know really what it means by async in this context. Like I know what it is when async is false, but if async is true, I probably would get confused as to what sort of async mechanisms it's using. But I can pretty much read through this. There's a block statement, there's a directive literal that says use strict, and we won't go into all of the use strict stuff. But you can kind of grasp it. And it's a little bit of a faff and it's a little bit of an overhead, but it's no way beyond our comprehension. And really what a plugin is doing is it's taking the code, it's breaking it into an async syntax tree. It then creates the transformed async syntax tree, and then outputs the transformed code. So this is what's happening every time you run Babel, right? It's not complicated. It's quite doable. So let's look at an example. If I've got a piece of code that's const n equals 1, this is my very first Babel plugin. I want to change the letter N to the letter X. Actually, you can go through the path. Babel has some great utilities to be able to do this really easily and change that N to X. And if you output that, then you get this. So I've written a very simple plugin. It's not very useful, but you get the point. So this is all an example of meta programming. So meta programming is a very powerful concept. And I don't know who's familiar with meta programming. Who's familiar with this? You're not, Tom? You've got every other answer right. So meta programming is a technique in which computer programs have the ability to treat other programs as their data, which is kind of intriguing. It means that a program can be designed to read, generate, analyze or transform other programs, and even modify itself while running. So I'm hoping for a bit of an eye-opening moment here. It's like, my program is transforming itself while it's running. Oh my goodness. And it allows programs greater flexibility to efficiently handle new situations without recompilation. And it sounds like, oh yeah, okay, this is kind of the thing that it's about, right? And metaprogramming can be used to move computations from runtime to compile time to generate code using compile time computations and to enable self-modifying code. So this makes sense, right? So this is actually what Babel is. It's what it's doing. It's what it's about. That's the reason it's here. And let's think about the kind of power that we could get it to use. So I don't know if anyone's familiar with the pipeline operator. I don't know if you've used F# before or another programming language that has the pipeline operator. So and then Elixir is a programming language that I really like. It's based on Erlang. It's not as popular as I'd like, but it's got this kind of syntax. So if you imagine that you've got 1, and imagine that probably returns 1 as a number or some number, and then you wanted to then double it, and then you wanted to then resolve a promise on it later. So you want it to kind of, and imagine if you had like these promise resolves happening in a really nice little kind of staged async process that was just doing 1 step at a time. I do this, I do this, I do this. This is functional programming, right? This is the beauty of functional programming. You're just operating on data that's already there and doing the next thing. It's actually really clean and really easy. But the way that you do this in JavaScript probably wouldn't be this clean and elegant. And actually, JavaScript doesn't understand this. It's only been pitched as a proposal. It's not actually become part of the JavaScript programming language. So let's run Babel on this. Oh no, yeah, it kind of didn't understand it. It's a shame. So it got stuck as soon as it hit the first pipeline operator. So let's find a plugin to help us with that, because we know that that syntax is a proposal. Someone's probably done something to help us be able to use this elegant code. And there's this plugin proposal here. And you run it. And this time it's saying, well, actually, there's different ways of interpreting this. So you probably need to put some options in there. The proposal requires a proposal option, and proposal must be one of minimal, F#, hack, or smart. Okay, we deal with that. And we deal with how it's using, if you go back here, what it's struggling with is that % mark at the bottom. It doesn't know what to do with it. So you tell it what to do with it, because the plugin understands it. And plugins are basically a bunch of plugins, but also paired with options. And now it's been successfully able to read that code that is not native JavaScript. And it means that if there's something in another language that you really like, or I don't know if you've sometimes thought about DSLs, people know about DSLs, right? Sometimes if you want to add your DSL as actually part of some native code, you could actually write your own Babel plugin to make that part of the code base. And there's been some cases that's been done really nicely on Ruby on Rails. Some of the things that they have around active record and some of the syntax that they pick up around that's been adopted has actually come from from this kind of meta programming thinking. Let's crack on. What other questions do you have around Node and Babel when you run them together? This was really annoying. Has everyone always been able to do this easily? How do you run Node in Babel? Babel in Node. If you like go to look up how do I Babelize code in Node, it's not that easy because you end up coming out with examples like this where you'd like use Babel Node. So I need to use a different Node runtime to run my Babel code in Node. What? I don't want to do that. That's annoying. That's super inconvenient, right? I don't know if anyone and one of you would actually naturally go and use this tool and feel quite comfortable about using that. Like, I'm sure there's a gotcha there. I'm sure that's not right. But this is the examples that I found online. But let's look back at the My Map example, and let's actually try and get it working. Let's try and get this working in Node nicely. So we've got My Map, and I want to write a library or a package that I can share with someone else. This should be quite simple. We do this all the time. If you haven't published an NPM package before, I encourage you to do that. It's a good thing to do. And let's get this working because this is simple, right? Got My Map in a Node app. I'm going to publish it as a package, and I'm going to expose it that piece of JavaScript, and then consume it. So again, really simple. This is how I used to do it. This is how at Sky Days I used to reuse and import modern JavaScript into a Node app. So you need a polyfill first. That's a pain in the backside, isn't it? You know, have you done that before? Hands up if you've used polyfills and had to pull them in. It's annoying, isn't it? It's like, well, it just tells me I need to do this thing, so I'll do it. But I don't really understand what I'm doing. I'm just plonking it on there because it doesn't work if I don't. And that's really not the way to write JavaScript, really. And then I use Babel register, and then I can pull in that library. And once I then read that in, I can then actually use it. And this works. This works fine. But what's it doing? Every time you hit that index.js, it's running all those commands all over again. And it's like, do I want Babel to be transpiling over my code for every single request? And sure, it's got some clever caching mechanisms and all the rest of it going on underneath. But this is really confusing. This really confused me. It confused me for years. I didn't try and go and fix why it confused me. I just kind of lived with it. And that's why I was really lazy. But actually, what we should be doing, if you do want to use modern JavaScript in Node without just running native Node runtime, and you do want to transpile code, is you want to do this. And this preset env that I talked about before is super clever. It's really clever. It's great. This, you can tell it what you want it to target as a version. And now when you transpile your JavaScript with the preset and you run this, you get some JavaScript that environment will run and understand how to use. Okay. Only got a few more things to share because I know we want to get to some things. So the other upshot of this is that you can even say, I'd like to target IE10 or IE8, and it will be able to transpile that for you. And in this case, you can see that the array.map has been transpiled in a way that old school JavaScript understands, where on the previously, if you were saying, I want the current node it wouldn't, because Node knows how to read arrow functions. So it's really good to be able to use modern JavaScript so easily and just do it in that ecosystem of the Babel presets. And just go to the Babel presets because they're really good. You don't need to worry about juggling all of these plugins all about this place where actually the preset will largely deal with it for you. But overall, my advice is don't use Babel in Node. Just don't. Like, unless you really need to, just don't. Like, if you find yourself writing require whatever, and you're like, oh no, I want to write import, just don't. Just use require. It's fine. It's so much easier just using it natively and not worrying about all the hassle of transpiling it and all of the little gotchas, unless you have to, right? Because there are times that you want to be able to use pipe operators. There are times that you want to use forward-thinking JavaScript and more clever ideas. But yeah, seriously. Okay, what about React and Vue.js? And this is why I was kind of laughing at your point that React is super easy, because actually I remember React when it first came out, and it's like nothing could read that React syntax. The JSX syntax at the beginning is like nothing read that thing. Actually, the React preset that is officially distributed by Babel is great. It's really good. It's easy. You consume it. It knows what you're doing. And Vue doesn't have a preset that's published by Babel, but they have a preset that's published by Vue. Okay, so there's very few Babel official presets. It's mostly the React and the preset env, and that's it. But then on the Vue side, and you'll start seeing this with a lot of other kind of vendors like Next.js, Nuxt.js, those guys aren't just saying, oh, this is easy. You know, it's so difficult that they actually have to give you their preset of how they're compiling and transpiling their JavaScript for you, so you don't have to worry about it. So always use the official vendored Babel presets. So hopefully you've got your head around about what are plugins, what are presets, how do they work, how are they used. So let's just finish with the overview and advice that Crispin gave us for giving it a quick overview at the end of our talk. So where is the Babel ecosystem at? It's got some mature, straightforward tooling. It's got really good. You dig into it and it's got some good stuff. It's plugins and presets. Don't use it with Node.js, unless you have to. There are, if you want to ask about TypeScript later, I'll share some thoughts on that as well. Helpers and tooling for building your own plugins is there. It's easy to do. It's accessible. Feel free to try and do this. You could create your own new programming language at Hack Day using these tools. Official presets take away many, many, many problems. And framework authors providing their own presets, which makes this simpler. Loaders into bundlers still contain a lot of magic, and they do it differently. The way that Webpack does it is very differently to the way that Babel will do it. And actually, even if you use Babel in Webpack, Webpack will ignore a lot of the module loading side of the Babel plugins that you use, because there's just always so much magic going on there. That is so unstable, that part of the JavaScript ecosystem. It's going to be like that for another few years until that stabilizes and everything reads it natively, which it will do eventually. We're getting closer. But the way that Node reads modules is different to the way that Babel transpiles modules, which is different to how like the old module ecosystem worked. And then when you try and mix and match them, you will just be wanting to stab your toe with a fork. Mixing matching is really horrible. But please do look deeper. There's so much good stuff in there. And if you do want to sit around for hours in the evening, typing in commands and saying, oh, I wonder what happens when you do this. I wonder what happens when you use this plugin with that plugin, mix them all together and use something totally different. Yeah, it's good fun playing around with that stuff. I'm going to end there. Thank you very much for listening. And I think that will be it until the pizzas arrive at 7. They're a bit late, but feel free to have another beverage, alcoholic or non, and chat or play pool and all that good stuff. If there's any questions, should we open the floor to questions? Tom.
So you mentioned Erlang.
F#. They use.
They compile down to JavaScript. So therefore, they will have a very nice processor.
I've not seen Elixir compile down to JavaScript. I think if you looked at what's the tool called? You've been using it, the Rust tool for WebAssembly. WebAssembly, it does give you sort of a kind of almost like machine byte level code transpiled version of JavaScript that's even more efficient and fast than JavaScript. It doesn't just transpile it to JavaScript and run it in your browser. It's like almost as low level as you can get in a browser. And so that doesn't actually go to JavaScript. It goes to bytecode, which again, WebAssembly, if you want to get into that and leverage that, please do. I'm sure that's another level of head explosions that you will enjoy.
Why would you not target the oldest, most decrepit version of JavaScript account?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's because, I don't know, I think everyone's got their own unique answer for this. I think for us, it doesn't just affect JavaScript runtime, but it also affects how you do CSS or how you go about testing all of these environments. And even though you probably think, yeah, well, it probably would work, but what if you're like, okay, yeah, I'm going to target IE8. Okay, do you want to test this for me? It'd be like, what? You know, no one's used IE8 for years, right? So I just think that there's a bit of a mismatch, and in the end, it's like, what's the point? And what are you trying to save by doing that? I think also, if you always cater for like really old stuff, you're almost giving them an excuse. Like we have a lot of government clients and we love them. But also if you give them an excuse to keep old stuff for longer, they will. And it's best not to. But again, that's a really interesting, you might have your own thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I suppose, yeah, my rule would be that it's not necessarily going to be always as efficient to go back, because it's got to use JavaScript out of the more compromise that's make it very complex.
Yeah. So yeah, TypeScript, it's a little bit of a different mechanism, and that so Node TypeScript is a different runtime. So there's a preset for Babel for TypeScript. Use it, it's great, it's amazing. So you almost got these two ecosystems, right? You've got your Babel front end side, and then you've got that. This is where you can very clearly separate them, because, and then your TypeScript Node side, And so actually, just by using those two separately, it's actually quite simple. And just the ecosystem tells you how to use it. And it just gets a little bit more complex when you have to start layering them on top of each other. So say, for example, you need to write React in TypeScript that runs server side. Then actually that's really hard to do without using Babel and TypeScript node. And that's where it becomes a little bit more complex. And that's why Next.js ends up having to have its own presets that it offers for you. So it starts getting more complicated when you do that. But if you can use it on surface level or just use it client side, it's just client side, use that Babel TypeScript preset and you're away. It just becomes a lot more complicated when you're trying to do it on the server side at the same time. Cool. Come.
If you have different presets, how difficult is it to do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. If you've got a lot of presets and plugins, how do you just get a load of error messages? And how do they display themselves? And I think what I've seen is it's whatever error hits first is the error that you're going to get first. And so if there's multiple error messages across it, so like that time where I showed you the pipe operator, when it first hit, it was like, I don't understand what you're showing me. So that hit that first because that was that putting it into AST. It couldn't put it into AST. It was like, I don't know what this thing is. And then next it could put it into AST and it's like, well, actually, when I go to run it, I don't understand this. So it will be as the order that it goes through. But the good question that I have tried to play around with and didn't get to the answer to was, if you put in 2 different plugins or 3 or 4 different plugins, does it always run those plugins in the order that you put them in? And I think it probably does. I think it runs like the AST rendering ones first, and then it goes back and does the transformation ones after, and then whichever error it hits first, it would blow up on that error, is what I think it would do. But don't quote me on that. Cool. Thank you very much. Did the pizzas arrive? Oh, there's like 10 large pizzas for just us.
Just driving around outside getting cold. I just remember one more thing. Next, we don't have a meetup next month because it's December, but Hannah, who used to run Glug back in peacetime before the apocalypse, she got in touch today to say that we're going to try and do like a joint meetup Christmas thing. So with all of the tech meetups, we did it